Standards Project. This is our second workshop. You met about a year ago, almost to the day, and we had our first workshop. So I'm here with Nick Calageresis from the Lakota Group, and we're going to go basically over 4 items, sort of the development process, how we arrived at where we are today. Want to mention that these standards themselves are part of an overall neighborhood stabilization approach, so they're not, everything, but this is one spoke on the wheel. I'm going to go over real briefly the original design standard managed approach that you heard a year ago, our current design standard proposal, and then where we go from here. So basically the process, in spring of 2012, the council directed the city manager to come up with some type of residential design standards, primarily for traditional neighborhoods. A Lakota Group was hired. They came and did research, met with focus groups throughout 2012. A joint workshop was held, like I said, the winter of 2012. And then spring and summer of 2013, we met with a design standard review group made up of stakeholders in the building industry and boards and commissions of the city. Got their comment, and you received all that, and you received that in a packet, sort of a summary report that I'm not going to go over, but it was in your packet, so you kind of take a look at that. And then that's where we are today. We redrafted the standards, kind of changed the proposal or approach around a little bit, and now we're here at this workshop again. So a year ago we came to you and said we were going to go with a 3-tiered approach. The first tier was going to be basic design standards. They're going to be basic, simple, citywide, to all single and two-family homes. Just part of our regular process. Appeals would be the same, go through the Board of Appeals. We had a second tier which was going to be tied to financial incentive programs and historic district properties. They're going to be much more stringent, better defined. Appeal process would probably go through a new review body. And then we had the third tier, which was a sort of a neighborhood area plan district. Like most of you are familiar with what a plan development is, sort of a plan development that would fit right over a certain area, and then you would have those design standards just for that area. On an area-by-area basis, Plan Commission and Council would be the review bodies for that. So what we're coming with today is basically Tier 2 has been removed from the proposal, and we're doing a universal design standard, and it's not called Tier 1 or Tier 3. I just put them on there because I took off the middle one. So it has the simple, well-defined basic standards. It's citywide for single and two-family homes. It'd be adopted as part of the zoning ordinance, just built right in, administered through regular process and appeal process through the Board of Appeals. And the second tier, the other one would be a neighborhood overlay, traditional neighborhood overlay design code. That would have the specific design standards, illustrated and detailed, based on the style or type of structures, the physical and visual character of the neighborhood. The design guidelines and the code revisions would be established through the creation of an overlay district, so you'd put it over the top of the regular zoning. Alternatively, you could do a plan development and kind of augment this model overlay code that we have here that we're going to go through. But it would require a grouping of homes that retain traditional character at a minimum of a block face, intersecting street to intersecting street. So you're trying to keep that character of the block. It's pointless to have the overlay over 1 or 2 properties where the rest of them don't have it, because you're not maintaining that rhythm of the street, of the neighborhood. It'd be administered and enforced through zoning. Exceptions for materials and some construction methods would go through an administrative review. Any challenges to that, you'd go through the Board of Appeals. So I'm going to get into the universal design standards, and then Nick is going to go over the overlay, traditional overlay, neighborhood overlay design standards. So again, these are going to be universal. They're going to apply to all single and two-family homes, and that doesn't matter if you have 4 people renting 1 room in each thing. If it was designed as a single or a two-family home, it would apply. Again, these are very basic, very simple, but it's going to deal with existing buildings, windows and doors, decks and patios, any additions or major changes, and major changes are defined as a 50% change to a facade. An addition is obviously any bigger footprint or elevation change. Talk about materials orientation, the height and footprint, style and form and facades, and then basically the front yard setbacks for infill construction. So when you have an empty lot in an already established neighborhood where you can set that home. So windows and doors, basically, there's three items in the overlay. Windows and doors that are fronting or visible from a street could not be removed by closure or filling. And just some of the pictures I threw on here. Here's a long-term filled door. It's permanent. So they just basically filled this door off. You can see the shrubbery growing up above it. Not real nice. The rest of the building doesn't necessarily look too bad. Could use some paint. Here you can see a lot of closure of windows. This one as well, there's a lot of closure of windows. You probably heard a lot of things saying, well, is that a maintenance issue? Isn't that a maintenance issue? It is not. This meets building code. I mean, they're legally closed off, they're sided, but this character of this house no longer exists. So universally, we're not going to allow the windows to, well, we're recommending not to allow the windows to be closed off or the doors to be closed off permanently. Obviously, you could board them up for security or for weather protection for a short period of time while you're doing rehab or doing repairs. And decks and patios are now going to be limited to a rear or side facade of a building. If you're a double-fronted lot, you're a through lot, at that point you don't have a rear of the building. So there are exceptions built in for that. But you can kind of see what decks look like on the front of buildings. And then also decks that are visible from the street, even if they're on the sides, would have to include posts, rails, balusters, and the fasteners being non-visible. Trying to give a little bit higher quality to a deck on a home. If you're doing a major change or an addition to the building, the material and color would have to be complementary and tie into the original building. There's just some examples here. All the color matches, but you can see it's materials that are drastically different. This building has about 6 different building materials on it. Colors may not be super far off, but the materials themselves, if you were out there in person, it looks much worse than the visual image. This structure looks pretty nice, but the addition itself is vastly different color, different materials. And when you walk down the street and see it, it just does not look like one building. It looks like 2 of them that got pushed together. For orientation, footprint, and height, basically we're saying that additions should be placed on the rear or side of the building, not on the front of a single or two-family home, with the exception that if it's architecturally compatible, and you can prove that, you can show it in your plans, that you could build it onto the front. Also, that addition shouldn't be 50% bigger than the existing building footprint. You shouldn't over or dominate the existing home with your addition. And then additions should not be higher than the dominant roof line. And you can kind of see what a dominant roof line would be. These images just basically show, what addition on the rear or the side. If you can imagine it on the front, it doesn't look that great. Talking about facades, basically any facade facing a street, we're now saying that it must have at least 25% area devoted to windows and door openings. What we get a lot of, and it's kind of hard to see, basically like this wall plane here, they just closed it off. Sometimes they'll close it off for a number of reasons. They don't want to pay for windows, they're changing the interior in some way, but that's not a very good look for a street facade. This one, again, is hard to see. This image, and Nick is going to go into it a little bit more detail with the overlay, this area here is about a 25% fenestration in that wall with windows. And then the last one was just infill construction, which was the front setback, and it's basically lining up the structure onto the street. And this one's not that great of an example, but you can see most of the homes are pulled back. This one's probably about 20 feet back from the rest of the homes in the block. So as you're going down, all of a sudden you see a big void. And if it happens too much, you end up with I call it like a sawtooth street face. This is even a different example because it has the garage out in front, so the additional garage was out front. But that is that's the basis and the basics for universal standard. Once again, it applies universally for all homes, single and two families in the city. So we didn't get into a lot of detail on any kind of traditional style. If you're a Queen Anne, you have a distinct style of a home that is probably not going to apply to a 60s ranch or 70s ranch. So these were very, very basic and really just designed to stop some of the worst things that we've seen happening.
And David hit some of the the basic concepts, but in your handout, we get into more specific ordinance provisions for both the universal and the overlay.
Correct.
So
yep.
you're going, David's going over a longer ordinance in a brief time.
For the sake of time, it is very abridged. So, but trying to hit the highlights of what's on there. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nick to go over the overlay code. This is forward, this is back. This is the plan. This is the plan? There's a trigger on the bottom. And also, I wanted to mention that if you want to make any comments or anything, raise your hand, let me know. We have to take the mic around because of the style of the room. It is televised, so there you go.
Thanks, David. My name's Nick Kalogeresis. I'm with the Lakota Group. I'm the person with the long last Irish name. Thanks for having me back here again. And as David said, I'll be going over the overlay code. You have a copy of that. My presentation is really going to give an overview of the code. I'm not going to get into every sentence of the code, but give you the highlights and explain why we came up with some of the provisions as we did. First, we wanted to at least explain, what the overall objectives are, and I think we discussed these almost a year ago today. And, obviously the main point of this overlay code is to promote better design character of our neighborhoods and to maintain that character and to guide good design. So that's an important part. The other aspect is obviously protecting property values, protecting equity that's already for people who have already invested in their properties, and to stabilize and increase property values in places that may adopt this overlay code. The other thing that we want to promote is good rehabilitation methods. So some of the things that we explain in the code are really good, proper, I wouldn't say preservation techniques, but good rehabilitation techniques for traditional neighborhoods. And we want to encourage good infill design as much as we can and good additions. And obviously promote pride of place in neighborhoods that may adopt this code. Oops, I pressed the wrong button. Let's see. There we go. All right. Potential areas of application for the code. Obviously, we're probably looking at what we're calling traditional neighborhoods, neighborhoods that were primarily built before 1950. And I believe on this map, the areas that are in yellow are built before 1920. And I think the areas in green are between 1920 and 1950. So those are the areas where potentially this code could be applied. Traditional neighborhoods, Victorian neighborhoods, neighborhoods built in the 1920s before World War II. So that's what we're looking at. The code, I know it's a little long, but basically we kind of address three major parts. One is existing buildings. And we really are focusing on just a few things, actually, mainly windows and doors and porches, obviously, being a major element of traditional homes, the porch. So that's an important thing. We also are addressing patios and terraces and things like that. But when it comes to existing buildings, that's really all we're focusing on. Additions and major changes, and really we're focusing on, where it's placed, its orientation, materials, fenestration, windows, things like that, a little bit of style. And with Infill Construction, we're focused on very much the same thing, although we kind of added driveways and ramps to that as well for new construction. So, overlay common elements. Ooh, what happened? Oh, there it is. Okay. As we go through this, the basic elements of the code, there's these that we have above here. One is administratively, it can be adopted, as David said, as an overlay to an existing neighborhood on top of the existing zoning. Or secondly, alternatively, it could be adopted as part of a planned development process, and the code would serve as a model code. And you could actually probably add to that or modify it if we go through that process. There's two basic ways to administer it. Enforcement obviously would be, the Director of Community Development or the designee, so it would be in the Planning Department where it would be enforced. There are exceptions that could be made to this code for an applicant who, wants to use a certain material and that material is appropriate to the style of the house. An exception can be made for those instances. And if there's an applicant who is not happy with an administrative decision, they can, appeal that to the Board of Appeal. So we do have that appeal process in place for this code. Now, the three major things here, existing buildings, we're only looking at things that are viewable from the right-of-way. So that's mainly going to be the front facade, and it can be parts of the side elevation that are also viewed from the right-of-way, so from the sidewalk, basically. So that's all we're looking at. This code only kicks in if a project comes forward and they're going to change more than 50% of the front facade of the side elevations. That's when the code kicks in. So a question is, for all of you, is that something that's acceptable? Because that's really, right now, that's only going to apply for those people who are going to undertake a major project on their house. Now, in new additions, it applies to any new additions to 1 or 2 family homes located within the overlay. And then for all infill construction, all new construction within an overlay district would be subject to this code. Now, I'm not going to, let's see, we could talk probably a long time about materials. But throughout the whole code, basically, as you probably have read, we really stress maintaining existing materials, try to preserve them, maintain them, repair existing materials as much as possible. So throughout the overlay code, you're going to read that as a primary emphasis. But if original materials can't be maintained, then replacement is allowed. And we allow a whole range of alternative materials, both natural materials and synthetic materials. So we allow a whole range to be used in the overlay district. Pressure-treated woods requiring painting, staining, and wrapping is also included. A major emphasis on replacement is if you're going to replace materials such as a casing around the window, it should match the width of the original material, or the profiling and detailing. So it should match that as much as possible. New materials should be used appropriate to a certain design style if it's new construction. So if it's a Queen Anne house, usually Queen Anne house is a sided house. So if you're going to develop a new infill house, it's going to be a neo Queen Anne. It should have siding as really its primary material. And then materials should match color as appropriate to the house. And materials can be moved temporarily to undertake a rehabilitation project. So that's really the whole emphasis about materials throughout the whole overlay code.
Question?
Yes.
I don't know if this is appropriate, but when you're looking at materials, have we considered doing anything with lead and asbestos abatement if a project is commenced? Would this be the appropriate time to put that in?
That's a good question. I don't know if you have a suggestion on that.
Not as, you're really looking at the overlay here, so if we would be doing something, I think we'd want to look at that as a universal standard versus just a overlay, because why would we apply the standard that you're talking about for the environmental just to a select group of homes when it may be a citywide concern? So I think we have to look at it than just part of the overlay.
And I wouldn't challenge that, but I would like to say that a lot of this is looking at stabilizing and improving older areas of the community that would be most affected, and at least that it be considered to put that standard in there, that something to the effect any alterations or any construction, regardless of the percentage, that part of the program is lead and asbestos abatement.
For any project, correct?
That's correct.
George?
Yeah.
When you're talking materials, and if somebody is basically going to paint their house, and I would assume that's more than a 50% change under the standard if they're painting the entire house. If you got a neighborhood that has white, tan, yellow, chartreuse, will this standard allow that person not to paint the chartreuse?
We're not including painting under the definition of significant change or 50% change. I think what we're looking at is substantial alterations. If you're coming in with a set of plans for your house and if you're going to alter it in terms of like taking out windows, removing the porch, or adding a new addition, that's what comes under that definition, not paint. So paint doesn't fall under this.
I guess then, how does that get addressed? Because if we're talking about stabilizing a neighborhood and preserving property values, I'm living in a house and somebody comes in and paints it hot pink next to me, that's going to affect my values, and that's going to take away from the character of the neighborhood, because that's probably not a standard color that those neighborhoods were painted.
Well, I mean, we haven't considered paint during this process. I mean, that's something that could be considered. But I think, most communities in their design codes, most communities do not address paint simply because, it's a matter of personal preference. And I think one way to sort of address paint and try to encourage better painting is to try to encourage it from an incentive point of view. Because a lot of communities, for instance, will have things like a paint program, a house paint program, where you can provide free paint, but you can only use a certain color palette to be able to do that. I think most communities are trying not to get into the color aspect because that can be a really touchy subject in some communities.
Well, I was going to go back to David's original question with lead and asbestos. I believe that's really better addressed by the building code, and you'd have to talk to John Zarate or somebody there, but that's better addressed in that area, and with that type of stuff. So.
I'd agree that's probably a better avenue for something like that, but we can still look and see if there's any options there.
As far as the paint colors, I've been in a lot of communities where the use of color has been done effectively when it's done as on a neighborhood basis. I think there's more in the world than just beige. And I've seen some very attractive neighborhoods recently down south where there's a lot of bright colors, but it's all in a neighborhood that was revitalized as part of the old textile industry. These were worker homes, and it's really these homes, which were once pretty much ready to be torn down, to become very valuable, but it's been done as a neighborhood project.
I'm curious about this 50% of the facade changing. It seems to me that a person could come in and propose changing 40%, and then come in another 2 years later, another 40%, and another 20%, and he's pretty well changed it. Is the time component taken into account for the total change to the property over time?
In terms of total cumulative change, yeah. That's something to consider. There could be a time frame that could be put on in terms of permits. There are communities that have put in time limits, like any permit submitted within 5 years still have to, it could be a range from 1 to 5 years usually. Any permits, still fall under that 50% cumulative change. So that's something to look at for sure. Hey, any other questions? I guess we can continue to go ahead. And if you have any more questions, feel free to ask them. And again, I'm not going to go into all details. I'm just highlighting some of the major parts of the code. And under existing buildings, obviously, as I've said, we're looking at windows and doors and porches primarily. And so for windows, what we're trying to do is encourage rehabilitation of the existing windows as much as possible, placing storm windows when they're more feasible. And only if a window is significantly deteriorated, if it has rot or missing pieces, that window replacement would be considered. And so one of the things that we're primarily looking at are making sure that the window stays the same in terms of how it operates. So if there's a double hung window, and if it needs to be replaced, it needs to be a double hung window in kind. If it's things like that, making sure we maintain the glazing pattern. So if it's 4/4 or 2/2, that the replacement window has to have the same glazing pattern primarily. We are allowing, if there needs to be a change for window replacements, we are allowing a 5% variation from height to width pattern is allowed. So we are allowing a little bit of change in that if somebody wants to replace a set of windows and wants to have a wider window opening or a smaller window opening, we can allow that variation. In terms of window casings, for many traditional homes, this is an important feature of the home, especially around windows. A lot of Queen Anne's have trim work around the perimeter of the house as band boards. So they're very character-defining features. And so, again, under this code, we are encouraging property owners to maintain the original casing, repair them as much as possible, repaint them and reinstall them. But if they're severely deteriorated or missing, to replace them in kind with similar materials or synthetic materials as much as possible. And they should maintain the width of the original materials as much as possible. This is, an existing window with original trim. This is a window that's actually been replaced, and this is replacement trim around it. So it's, you can find replacement parts fairly easily. So we want to be able to maintain that feature. Also, trim also has a good feature in protecting windows from being infiltrated by water. So they do have a functional characteristic to them, too. Windows and doors, as David has mentioned earlier under the universal code, the same thing applies in the overlay code, is that we don't want original door openings to be replaced or enclosed. They need to be maintained. We are allowing that if a property owner wants to install a secondary entrance to the house, and if it's viewable from the public right-of-way, they can install a secondary entrance off to the side if they want, as well as, especially if they're going to use the back part of a porch as an entrance. So we are also allowing temporary door closures if there's a building remodeling or a project happening that it can be temporarily enclosed. And again, same with everything. We are maintaining, yes. Sure.
Part of the code, it said that, you can't remove existing windows. You have to replace them the way they are. Well, many of these houses weren't built with conservation in mind. And I'm wondering what would be the problem if that top window was a window to the attic. The middle windows on the side.
This one here?
Yeah, that top one. And the middle windows on the side, in order to make this more efficient house, he took out the middle window and ran the siding the same material. What would be wrong with that?
You mean this over
Yeah.
here you're talking
Yeah.
about?
I guess,
Yeah.
I'm looking at, you want people to revitalize the houses, and part of revitalizing the house is also to make it more insulated, better equipped to handle, to lower your energy costs. So I'm not sure why we wouldn't allow some of those types of things to happen, or if or can they do that going through the appeal process?
I think under this code, we don't forbid window enclosures, I believe. I think, yeah. We do? Yeah, we do. So we don't forbid it. So it's only if you're going to replace the windows, the existing windows, you needed to replace them with similar windows. But under the current code, we're not forbidding that enclosure to happen.
No, we are forbidden. We
Oh, we
are
are.
forbidding it.
I'm sorry.
Is this is working? We are forbidding it. And I guess to kind of answer your question, the issue with removing the windows from the facades of the house, and all of this, again, is applying to the front facades and the facades visible from the street. So we don't hit the back or the rear of the building. It's really trying to keep that neighborhood character again. But once you start changing the distinctive features on your pre-50s homes, I mean, there's 20 different styles. There's Queen Anne's, there's bungalows, there's craftsman's, there's four squares, there's tons and tons of them. Their big defining features are their windows and their door openings and their porches. So when you start closing them off for whatever purpose, you want to close it off because of, in your case, efficiency. You want to close it off because you just don't want a window in that room, or you have a dog that's too tall that he's going to jump up on the window. When you start changing those over time, that house loses its traditional character. Again, this is only for traditional neighborhood overlaid areas. And that's the best way I can answer your question, Jeff, is that as you start doing those things, you do start removing the character of the building. And a good example with that is, you just not putting the trim on and putting all just solid windows that don't open. It's not, the house isn't going to look the same. Now, for the goal of the energy efficiency, it might be in there. Windows themselves, even these old windows, and I think, in my opinion, especially these old windows, can be rehabbed and be very, very solid. It's just, you have to actually do the work. The other thing, too, with some of these houses, by some of the modern practice of air-tighting everything in these old houses is going to be a mold issue. The houses are supposed to breathe.
Well, the other thing too, if this
But
is
it's mainly aesthetics.
yeah, if it's a bedroom, if you enclose that or lose the window, you're actually violating. In most communities, you would violate the building code because bedrooms have to have a window for egress. So for that, and plus the other reasons, just buy a good storm window or buy a replacement window that will give you that energy efficiency.
Can I answer your question, Jeff, too? I mean, those homes were designed to have a certain look and feel to them. And as you start to chop them up, they lose their architectural integrity. And the term we use in our business, it's curb appeal. All of a sudden, the house looks out of balance. There's something was there, and it's missing. And I think it's a major curb appeal issue. And, at what point do you stop? So
I can also see I can also see, though, if we say, okay, you got to have that traditional window, but it's okay to put a storm window over that, you're losing the character of that house also, potentially.
Well, I think in our code, I think we do address storm windows, and I think you can provide storm windows that either are double paned or single pane. Better if it's single pane, so that it just goes right over the window. You can still see the window, so it wouldn't affect the character of the house at all, actually. Yes.
I click clack a lot more than Darren.
My question would be, what you want things that are put in that are basically similar to what's there. We have a lot of homes in this community with bay windows, and a lot of times these bay windows are big flat windows, and it's actually much more appealing to put in the beveled windows. I mean, are we going to allow for things like that with this, just because there are so many of them? You see it, and I happen to have a home that has we've gone from a flat to a bevel. Now, if we want to change that later on, go back to a flat, I mean, are we going to run into an issue with that? Because it's not really the same as what it is when this goes into effect, but it might be going back to what it was when the home was built or whatnot.
A house like this, a Queen Anne house, some of them do have bays. I mean, some are bayed out, like what you could probably see at the corner here. So those types of bay windows, that's something we'd want to encourage. But I think the bay windows you're talking about, which a lot of ranch homes, huge. I don't think in some circumstances for like a Queen Anne or a Victorian home would not be appropriate, and we probably would not encourage that.
Right, and with appendix of these overlay standards will be a design guideline book of housing styles pre-50. I mean, you go pre in the 40s, some are built in the 50s, but not as many. They're actual styles of houses. When you get pre-20, they become more vernacular, but there's still they're styled houses. They have a character to them. They have elements that are features of those homes. And those things will be reviewed when we look at that. So if the window had been changed out at one point and you're going back to do a major facade change, you would go back to the traditional house style, not to what has happened over time. And again, this is a code that's trying to preserve the traditional character of the home and of the neighborhood. So it's not a a code for, that's what it's for. So we're trying to keep that traditional character of the neighborhood.
Any other questions? So we're going to keep going. I'm sure you'll have more. And in terms of doors, what we have here and what you've seen in the code are just typical doors for traditional homes, homes that have dorms that have doors with a mixture of raised paneling and glazing. And this is what we're trying to encourage. And so, typical panel doors, 4-panel, 6-panel, and then combination. And then here's our storm doors. One of the things I think we want to try to encourage is have storm doors where it's fully glazed in which you can see the original door from the storm door. That's something that we want to try to encourage. Also have, storm doors with kick plates in them. So these are just some of the samples that we, want to try to encourage. Porches being obviously one of the major things that we're looking at in the code, and obviously, again, we're stressing preserving as much of the original material as possible from, all these major elements from foundation piers to the steps to the skirting to the roof and columns and things like that. Obviously, if some things need to be replaced, they can be replaced in kind with, both natural and synthetic materials and be complementary to the house's original design. So for a Queen Anne house, we definitely would like to see a Queen Anne porch. This would only be applied for, the code applies for those applicants who are seeking to replace their porch or undertake any major changes to the porches. So we want to try to be compatible with the existing house. Treated lumber can be used as a material as long as it's either painted or I'm trying to find the right word, enclosed, or wrapped. I'm sorry. Wrapped or painted. So that's one of the things that we're trying to encourage. One of the things that we want to try to address is porch enclosures. That was a major issue that came up through this process. Obviously, we want to try to encourage people to maintain the original porch as much as possible to maintain 100% transparency. Originally, all porches were open. Sometimes during the 1920s and 30s, they began to be enclosed, but they were often enclosed with fully 100% transparent windows. So what we're trying to do is try to avoid things like this from happening in the neighborhood. So, but we are allowing some enclosure to take place, and the major thing is we're allowing up to 60% enclosure to occur in the neighborhood. So this is about 60% right here. So what we're trying to, and again, try not to have happen is something like this where we lose a lot of the porch. This is like at 30%. So we want to try to maintain some transparency of the porch and maintain the overall neighborhood's porch appearance. All right, let's keep going. Oops, went too fast here. This is pretty straightforward. Decks and patios being placed on the side or the rear elevation, and pretty straightforward. And we should try to encourage new decks to at least fit in with the existing house. So having some railings that would be appropriate to the existing house. Another thing we try to address is ramps, and where we'd like them to be located is on the side, and try to have them more integrated with the style of the house. And you can see the design of this ramp fits in a little bit more with this Queen Anne traditional house, and it's more integrated with the overall design of the house. If there's not enough space between the driveway and the house, it can be allowed up into the front as long as it's designed appropriately to fit in with the style of the house. In terms of additions and major changes, what we want to be able to try to do is address issues about where the addition happens and and how does it look on the overall house, and try to address it in terms of its height and scale, overall materials, windows and door openings, and additions should be compatible with the existing style of the house. Additions, especially on the rear side or on the side of the house, should not be higher than the ridge line of the existing house. So what we're trying to do is making sure that the addition fits in with the scale of the existing house, that it doesn't overpower it. So we want it to remain behind that dominant ridge line. So that's one of the major features. And again, David already showed this. This is where, in terms of placement, where addition should take place in the rear of the house, whether it could be behind the house or on the side. So that's major where we'd like to see houses take place overall. I mean, additions take place overall. And as David mentioned, the overlay code also has, a requirement that at least 25% of an addition that faces a right-of-way must be transparent or must be glazed. So that's what we're looking at to try to avoid some of this, that we see from the street. Windows should generally follow a height to width ratio of 2 to 1 or 2 to 3. We also are, looking at trying to manage dormers. The basic requirement here is the dormer should be compatible with the overall style of the house. Ideally, new dormers should be placed on a side or a rear elevation, but we can't allow it on the front if the dormer fits with the style of the overall house. And this is like a typical four-square house, and this dormer sort of has been designed to fit within the overall style. The dormer should also be placed below the dominant ridge line or the top ridge line, so it should be below that, not go above it. And in terms of infill construction, we are looking at, in terms of placement of the new house, what's a little bit different in this overlay code is we're allowing a little bit of a setback allowance, especially if there are smaller lots that we're dealing with and the property owner wants a little bit more front yard space. Obviously, the new house needs to meet all current zoning requirements, but we are allowing a little bit flexibility where the maximum setback could be 30 feet. Whereas the current setback is like 15. So we are allowing a little bit of leeway in traditional neighborhoods simply because of sometimes we're faced with smaller lots. And in terms of new construction and how it all fits in with the overall character of a neighborhood, what we have here is that in terms of the height of the new house, it should not be more than 1 story higher than surrounding or adjacent buildings. So if you're going to build a new house, it can be maybe 3 stories in this block in particular. So that's what we're looking at. So that's what the overall building envelope is. And again, it's to manage the overall scale of an existing house within a neighborhood, or new house within an existing neighborhood. And then one thing is, the other thing that we addressed in the code are garages. If a property owner wanted to develop a new garage, obviously the preference is for that garage to go in the rear portion of the lot, serviced by a driveway. But if the property owner doesn't want to do that, we are allowing attached garages. The major feature here is that the garage must be set back from the front wall plane at least 5 feet. The garage should also be compatible with the existing style of the house. And you can see this garage does that. It is set back and does fit in within this house. And then we also allow carports. The same thing is that it must be set back 5 feet from the plane of the house. And then last but not least, we do get into driveways. And one thing that we are trying to encourage to give some choices to property owners in traditional neighborhoods is to allow for a traditional asphalt or concrete driveway serving the garage. We could also allow a two-track driveway and also driveways that could be paved in stone or permeable pavers. If somebody wanted to install permeable pavers, they can do that as well. So we are allowing that type of flexibility in the code. So that's it.
Thank you. This is very helpful. Can we assume that when in the references here to materials, you're talking head to toe, including roofing?
We don't address roofing in the code at all.
Okay. I'll just give you an example. On that other, when we had that zoning meeting, the consultant showed a slide. Looked like a very nice $300,000 home was completely covered with solar panels, which was, some may find attractive, but I thought in terms of neighborhood blending in, it looked not good. And I don't know how you, I would consider a material, but it's just not referenced specifically in here, so I don't know how you deal with roofs.
I don't think we have the ability under state statutes to prohibit placement of panels.
I think that might be something worth looking into, because I know a lot of, and I don't know specifically about Wisconsin, but a lot of other communities are regulating solar panels that they must be placed on the rear portion of the house, or they could be placed on the garage, or they can be placed on the ground. So those are some options there, but obviously if there's any specific restraints here in Wisconsin, we'd have to address that.
Right. And I want to point out again that when we did these standards, we did, and I hate to use these terms, but we did a stop the bleeding universal standard. Stop closing up your windows, stop putting decks on the front of your house. For the traditional ones, they got much more detailed. It gets very, very difficult to try to do something that fits every house, because each house has very drastic and different styles. We didn't get into things that would be regular building code or regular, like alternative energy scenarios, placement of antennas. Some of those are exempt from your code regulations, so you're not going to see that. The other thing that I really want to point out with this from the first set, the three-tiered set that we talked about, where we were going to place it on areas, this one is one that it's going to be coming through. It would come through individually, and we'd be placing on neighborhoods or in areas individually, either as outlined, that we outlined here, or as developed as part of a plan development, so it could be augmented. I mean, if you have a neighborhood that's all one style of housing, let's say, you could augment a lot of these design standards to fit just that style or that time period of housing. This one had to be a little more broad because we're covering, a lot of years. 1850 to 1950. There's a lot of different housing that went up during that time frame. I guess I just want to point that out.
You do raise a good point, Tom, because the one thing when you started talking about roofing, and we don't really get into the roofing, but what we're seeing more, and it's more in some of the commercial and multiple family buildings, is we're seeing more steel roofing come in, and I hear concerns from adjacent neighborhoods when those roofs come in, the sound, well, first of all, how they look, and then secondly, some of the sound when it rains and hails and things like that, some of that. So if you start putting those steel roofs on some of these houses in some of these more confined environments, I guess that would be a concern. I don't think we looked at that at all, David, right? And so I think that might be one thing that we might want to address as well.
Thank you. This is a wonderful study for us. On page 11, where you talk about the enclosures of a front porch, I guess it's the one diagram that doesn't recommend the enclosure, the windows, in harmony with the rest of the house. And it looks like, you went to Home Depot and just picked those up. And they're not in harmony with the rest of the house. And, just the example that you gave would be like a 1920s house with a nice overhang and everything. But, so that was just one thought that, I think, if we're going to enclose, that it should feel like it's all in harmony, that it always would have almost looked like that. And then when we talked about a long time ago about the colors, I think, if you're doing an addition and you're talking about siding or whatever they're putting on, that would be one time that, of course, the colors would have to, and the type and style of siding.
Yeah, I think I probably didn't stress enough in the presentation that we do state in the code that materials need to be, the color of the materials need to be compatible with the existing house. So that's still a very general statement.
But paint can always be changed. But if you're putting on a permanent siding,
Exactly.
that's a little bit more serious.
Right.
Yeah, a couple of quick questions. On the basic standards, the question is going to be asked if we do this is how's this going to affect me and my house? So at what point do I have to be concerned? Not with I have another question for the overlay standards, but on the basic housing, do I have to be concerned when these standards are passed or not? Do I have to go out and look at my house and get ready for somebody coming down the street? Or do I only get concerned when I make changes? In other words, am I grandfathered in the way I am, even if I have some of these things on my house right now?
Right. It only applies if you're going to undertake a major project that's going to affect 50% of the front of the house.
Okay, that's what I heard you say. So if those houses on streets are already have closed-in windows and things, they're
Right.
Exactly. Grandfathered in. So everybody's grandfathered into the existing house that they're in. So
Exactly.
people can say, you don't have to worry until you go to start making a 50% change. That's correct. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is on the overlay areas, who's going to decide what areas are going to have the overlay standards applied to them? Are the people within that neighborhood going to be part of that process, or is there going to be somebody's going to look at the city and say, okay, we're going to start with this neighborhood, that neighborhood, that neighborhood, and where do the homeowners come into play in the decision-making process, and is that going to have to be, I assume that's something
Correct. Placement of, well, it can be. It's an overlay like any other zoning overlay. So the process is going through the Plan Commission and the City Council for adoption, augmentation, so to speak, to not only the area to make sure it fits in with the traditional overlay. Somebody may want it that it just doesn't fit. It's been too redeveloped for too long. But yeah, if what we're hoping to see is promoting the overlay package as part of the neighborhood revitalization effort. So using our neighborhood associations, which we're getting up there in number right now, they're very active. And a lot of times we hear from them that, I want to be able to protect my investment in my home from what's going on all around me. So those areas would come back through. We would review them as staff to make sure that they're appropriate and run them through the process. But it wouldn't have to just be neighbors requesting it. Elected officials could do it. Staff could find a neighborhood that's a cherished neighborhood that could be threatened, so to speak, by rehab and propose to put it on. But again, we would go through the regular process for that. We have neighborhood meetings. We have our public hearings for our rezones. And then there's discussion, at multiple steps all the way through the process. So it's not going to blindside anybody at all.
And that's the important part of. It's got to be initiated somehow. So what the overlay is technology. What the overlay allows us to do is to allow this to occur. So we pass the ordinance. It doesn't just like the universal. It just doesn't go in place. It takes some type of initiation. Then it takes some type of review. Plan Commission, Council, and so on.
people to be comfortable with
part of the reason why the second tier was pulled out of that, because that would just might be placed. The original concept for that second tier was to just place it on areas, and so we removed that and decided to bring it back to the review process before there's any adoption.
We're talking the Plan Commission. Because of the age of these neighborhoods, the Landmarks Commission should have a role in this whole process, too.
I think we would do something like that. Yeah, I mean, we're so. Place the opinion from, say, the Landmarks or somebody like that. We're moving through the
Could you explain or review the 50% change? What I'm concerned about is that you could.
Yeah.
And is that really what you're trying to do? It seems like for somebody
Yeah, definitely. When we first talked about it, we talked about any changes. Even one window replacement would have to kick in. But as this is the first stage going through, we had thought 50% is a nice starting point. So it would take what we consider a major change to the house for them to kick in. But no, that is one thing, and we had asked Nick specifically to bring that up at the beginning to find out from the group if that is something that you're comfortable with. Is 50% too much of a change, as you had said? And then I thought the cumulative discussion was a good discussion to have as well. So I don't know the answer to that.
I think it's up to you, what you feel comfortable with.
Yes.
It's
That's an open
one.
question. It's drafted to be 50%.
Now, I think one thing, I'm just throwing this out there, 50% can mean different things on different houses. Like, for instance, a Queen Anne that has a lot of windows. If you come in and propose taking out all the windows and replacing them, that could be 50% there. So it's going to depend by house to house. So,
I got the microphone for a second. 50%, I see we could have a couple different interpretations of that. But also it says for the side elevations that are visible from the public right-of-way, I go to any house in Oshkosh, stand on the sidewalk and see the side elevation. So that would bring the side elevations in with the front elevation, would it not? Okay.
it's that view shed, yeah. So you're looking at anything that can be viewed from the
Anything
sidewalk.
that can be viewed from the
Sidewalk.
public right away. That was my question.
I'll hold off.
So I'll just follow up on that 50% then, in lieu of what you just said. Is that 50% of each facade or 50% of the total facades that can be visible from the street?
Visible from the street.
Each facade visible. So the front is considered one facade. If you're an octagon house, you're going to have 8 facades.
No, but what I'm saying is that, you could have 2 sides in the front of the house that are all visible from the street. So if I make a change to the side of my house, but that's not 50% of the total visible from the street, because you're going to have that question.
Just that facade.
So it's 50% of each facade.
Correct.
Yep.
Once again,
Are any of these projects, what is the trigger to begin with a staff review? Could somebody go in and replace 1, 2, 3 windows without any review? Is it that you require a building permit? Do any? But could I go in and put my own window in without having a building permit?
Most communities, yeah, you need a building permit.
Yeah, is it being done? I mean, is it?
Could you do it, David? Yes, you probably could do it, but is it legal to do it? No. So, I mean, that is the answer. Legally, you need a building permit to replace your window.
So that triggers the review.
Right. So when the building permit comes into our office, if it's in the universal or if it's in the neighborhood overlay, it'll generate on the computer software and they'll check it. So, I mean, obviously, if they do any of the work without the permits, that's problematic. It's problematic with a lot of things.
I guess I'd like to have you take in consideration, because one of the things that was paramount through here was windows and doors seemed to be a big issue. You can be replacing the front door, to Dave's point earlier, because it needed to be replaced, and basically replace it with anything that's not in the character of the neighborhood, and this would never get triggered. You could do that with 1 or 2 windows and this would never get triggered. And so you can likely do whatever you want.
Correct.
I guess what I would be consideration is there certain things that you could put in this particular overlay that would just trigger an event, period, such as a window replacement or a door replacement, so that we can ensure that those things are keeping within the neighborhood so that we don't get death by window type of thing.
I mean, that is something to consider. I think that's up to discussion as what level does the overlay code really kick in. So I think it's up to you, whether a door or window replacement will do that. In terms of, in my opinion, I think no matter what type of design regulations you have, whether it's like a historic district overlay or a traditional neighborhood overlay like we're looking at, usually a single replacement of a window or a door gets reviewed, but it's mainly an advisory review. And like, okay, you have the wrong window, but here's what you should install, but you're not required to do that. So that's why most communities do have a threshold where a mandatory level sets in. And so a lot of communities will have that 50%. Now, there are communities that do have, anything that you replace goes through a much more stringent review. So that's a question for the community, is where that level is. Are you all comfortable with something like that?
Got a couple of questions. One is going to be the timeline of events, say before it comes to council and gets passed. I'd like to know what the sequence of events is and what the expected time frame is. But I'll save that. That'll be the second part. The first question is that some of these questions that have raised are fairly logical questions, such as Dave and Jeff have been raising. I assume that there are lots of other communities you've worked for that have the design standards, like on the stage 1, stage 2 that we have. And what have they found? What about the 50%? What is it that kicks it in? If they said 50%, is there never any application? In other words, what's the expected outcome of this, given the experience in other areas? One reason we brought you in was because you've been other places and done this with other places. So the hope is that those experiences would get fitted in here. And these questions are kind of logical, so I would think others have used either a 50% or something else, and there must have been an outcome, good or bad, I don't know what, in terms of changing neighborhoods and events. So, I mean, that's really what we're kind of looking for.
Well, I think they're
and also the timeline.
Yeah, they're excellent questions. I think most of the communities I've worked with will have a combination of advisory review and mandatory review. And so what we've kind of proposed here is like any 50% over, if you're going to do 50% more on your facade, that's going to impact your facade, it has to go through a mandatory review, and what's decided is mandatory. But under 50%, it would be an advisory. Okay, so if you're going to replace your door, okay, we're going to advise you. Here's like what you should do, but you're not bound by that decision. So that's one way in which to guide a property owner without telling him they have to do, because you may hear their complaints like, the city's going to tell me what I'm going to do with my front door. But when it comes to a major project on the house that will have a major impact of the way not just the house looks, but the whole neighborhood looks, you do want to have some control over that threshold. You do want to have that mandatory say about what your neighborhood ultimately going to look like. A door is probably not going to have as much impact as if there's a new addition being plunked on the side of the house. So that's where we kind of divide it at. And so that's a question for all of you, if you want anything under 50% to have some level of review to it. Because right now what we're proposing, there's no review for that.
And the other thing I just want to add on to what Burke had said, communities are all over the board on this. I mean, a lot of communities rely on the Architectural Review Committee, and what we were trying to do is avoid creating an Architectural Review Committee for every residential building permit that would be issued. So we were trying to come up with a set of what we thought were minimum guidelines to affect some of the most prevalent problems that we've seen in the community. But, I mean, communities are just all over the board on this. I was speaking with one of my friends down in Mequon today, virtually everything that they do requiring a permit goes through some type of architectural review committee. We didn't want to create an ordinance that would require something like that, so which is why we landed where we did. Secondly, where do we see us going with this as far as a timeline? This is the product that, after we've sat down, met with our stakeholder group, talked with some of you, talked with you, worked with Lakota. This is the product that we might do some fine tuning after this meeting, but this is the product that we want to take out for ordinance review early next year, meaning sometime, hopefully, maybe in late January, February, we can actually bring this to before the Plan Commission and potentially for the council to get this thing adopted. So this is the product that we want to bring out for review. So we haven't figured out how we're going to handle open houses yet, how other outreach, what other type of outreach we're going to do. But this is the product that we're kind of settling on after we've sat with the stakeholder groups, listened to some of the comments that we've heard. What really we're doing is bringing this to you, kind of showing you what our idea is. And if there's any major problems with this, we want to hear about it so we can potentially fine tune it. All these comments are great that David, Jeff, everybody are great comments. But we also want to get this. We could sit and talk about this forever. At some point, we're going to have to bring something forward for adoption, and we can always, if we need to, fine-tune. Now, I think we need to handle some of the most egregious things that we might have seen, that maybe we need to land on something with that 50% rule. I think we need to maybe talk about steel roofing in some of these areas. So those are some minor modifications that I think that we can make relatively quick. But this, or the proposal you have, is what we want to move forward with relatively soon. Hold on, David. Kathy was up first.
Thinking in terms of the traditional neighborhood overlay code, let's look at it positively. I think I see that small neighborhoods will come forward and want this, either because staff encourages them and they see the value of it, or because the owners want it. And those people are going to be quite informed about what this means and what it means for rehab and 50% and why we're doing this. And I see this as a positive kind of a thing. They're going to want these kinds of restrictions to preserve their neighborhood, or they don't want the overlay. The draft universal standards, that's something else. But I think the overlay, I think this can work because it will be explained carefully to the neighborhood, and they will like it or they won't like it, and the council will say, okay, we won't put this on you.
Yeah, how many times the Plan Commission Council adopted a zone change in an area where every single resident was opposed to it? I haven't, in my 18-plus years here, I haven't seen that happen too many times. So generally, there's some type of consensus that we've reached that have got us to that point.
There's two things, and I think that you brought out something that really illustrates what the death by a door, if you will. You have a 6-panel door, and you replace that with a hollow core veneer covered flat door, and it just changes the whole character. But I wonder if some of what we're doing would be, if it's helpful, to get some kind of direction from council, who at the end of the day, votes on this. If we're really talking about stabilizing and improving inner city, if you will, the inner city or the core housing in our community, then to what degree do we want to commit ourselves? Are we going to be all in or a little bit in? Because I think that helps us really frame this. I'm personally uncomfortable that this goes far enough to commit ourselves to stabilize the central part of our community.
So your opinion is we're not going far enough with this?
That is correct.
I agree with David. I think one of the overriding things they're trying to do here is protect the equity people have in their homes in the city of Oshkosh. For all of us, or almost all of us, our home is our major investment, and I think people can people can make blunders in making some changes to their home, and they don't realize what it's going to do to the value of that home. So I think we've got to really emphasize as we go forward, this is equity protection for the citizens of Oshkosh. The other thing is because some of these neighborhoods are historical or can be historical, there's a big impact with tax credits. And I think we hear people saying, oh, gee, it's going to cost me money, I can't afford that, and so forth. And depending on how we move forward to these neighborhoods and how we treat them as historical neighborhoods, there's tremendous benefits from tax credits. You want up to 25%. And, so there's a lot of positives for the citizens of Oshkosh to adopt these standards. And I think David is right. I think if we're serious, we have to be a little bit stronger.
I think we maybe have to think ahead how we can help citizens carry this out. And just talking about windows, might we have a window workshop? How can a homeowner either do the work themselves, or if they were looking for someone, what's the process? And I know that other places in the state, I know in Platteville they have a big area workshop every other year. But I think that we have to give them some help, education, and enable them to build the pride in their property that they do have. And I know that the people in this city love the heritage and love the history. We've got a Facebook site that there are probably almost 5,000 people on it. It's called You Know You're From Oshkosh. And there are houses, old grocery stores, whatever, that, someone will put a picture up and say, this is 1916. And somebody will say, my great-grandfather, built that. Or we lived across the street. Or what did they do to the front of the house that doesn't look like it should anymore? But people value our history. And I think this is one way to maintain that. So I really talked about two things, educating and maintaining our history.
I understand where everybody comes from on an issue like this, and I think, anybody who knows me knows I value history immensely. But you also have to understand that one constant in history is change. Now, I'm not saying that we want to have winking houses, basically, because of the windows changing and things like that. I understand things like that. When we start talking about this building new homes or building properties the same as what's there, I think we're kind of missing the boat, because some of the neighborhoods you drive through in the city, take, for instance, you're going down Doty Street, you see all these big two-story blocky homes, then all of a sudden there's this beautiful English Tudor that's right across from Fukelberg Park. Doesn't fit with all the other homes that are in the neighborhood.
We're not talking
style. But the thing, I know, but that's the things that we're going with in this direction with this. With a lot of the things we've talked about with the Plan Commission. We want, things to be the same in neighborhoods. That's a lot of what this is. You want to keep things same as that's part of what they were talking about. They want to keep things the same as their neighbors, and it's not necessarily, some change is a good thing. Drastic change, like we're showing, with the homes with windows disappearing and doors disappearing and whatnot, is I see where that's a bad thing, but we still have to have some leeway in there. Otherwise people are going to feel like, well, I can't do anything with my home other than what the city tells me.
We're not getting at making sameness. We're getting at trying to establish maybe a basic form, in the block. So we're not saying everybody has to be a Tudor, everybody has to be a Victorian. But what we don't want is, we don't want the windows boarded up. We don't want to see potentially in some of these neighborhoods a garage sticking off the front of the property. So those are the things that we're looking at. It's not to create sameness like you see in some of the neighborhoods throughout the country. We still want you to have some of that individuality, but
Where it comes from, because we've had things come through the planning commission where people say it doesn't fit in the neighborhood, or you know, it's slightly different than what's already there.
Oh. Like this one. This one is, I always like to use this one. Which one of these does not look like the other in this top one here? That's the kind of stuff that we're trying to look, that's right here. I mean, so if you look at this picture, that is what we're trying to look at, is trying to prevent things from this from occurring.
Where you have something that would be normally beautiful, it doesn't necessarily fit into a neighborhood.
Yeah, in the infill construction part, we don't mandate that there has to be a certain style to the house. It's just that its form has to be compatible in terms of its height, where it sits on the lot. It can be, a modern home if it's, if it meets some of those criteria. So, and there are a lot of communities with traditional neighborhoods that do allow modern homes to come in as long as they fit in height-wise, scale-wise. So, yeah, we don't mandate a style in that section. So there could be room for creativity as long as it's not, a 4-story ugly box.
Yeah, we're not looking to prevent the next Roby house from being some of these neighborhoods. We're not looking to stifle that type of creativity, but some of the most egregious examples, we're trying to get at those things, prevent that from occurring.
Right. Well, and I think it's important too to mention that, take a hard line. All these codes have built-in appeal process, so if there's something that you don't disagree with, it goes to a board to make that call, like with any other zoning code. Even interpretation.
This would be a question mostly for city staff. With a lot of these codes and things, there's always been an enforcement arm or an ordinance. Are we going to have that in this case too? If someone doesn't take out a building permit that's supposed to, is there going to be an enforcement arm to that they can be cited for code violation or building code violation? Or on these neighborhood overlay districts, is there an application fee that they have to pay to be, or like the business improvement district, 60% of the businesses have to agree to it. Is there going to be a standard of how many homes in a neighborhood have to agree to be in the overlay district, and how big a district is the district? Is there a definition for that? Because I think that's going to be an important piece for council.
3 good questions. First one, the area. If you look at the draft traditional neighborhood overlay, you'll see that little diagram, and that shows the area that we think is going to be that would be appropriate for this. It goes from, David, why don't you explain?
Well, it's basically becomes at a minimum level, we're saying a block face. So intersecting street to intersecting street, both sides of the street. To give you that visual impression of of the healthy area. It can be expanded, obviously, but we don't really want to do anything smaller than that. Again, it's an adopted overlay. We're not saying 50% of the owners have to agree or all the owners have to agree, but it's going to come through first neighborhood meeting, plan commission, public hearing, common council. If say we try to put it in a neighborhood and 10 of the property owners out of 10 come to the council saying we don't want this, I don't think it's going to get adopted.
Well, you could still, as a council, can still adopt it, but at that point, it kicks in the supermajority requirement because you'd have over 20% of the neighbors would be opposed to it. So if the vast majority of the neighborhood is opposed, I think vast majority, if 20% it kicks in a supermajority requirement of the council.
Right, and the other item, that block face, minimum size, it can be larger, would have to have a substantial grouping of traditional style homes. So if you have 1 or 2 houses on a block face that are traditional homes and all the rest are moderns or have been rehabbed so much that you can't really tell what their style was, that's not going to be an area that we're going to deem eligible, to put the overlay on, because really you'd be penalizing a lot of homes that aren't going to meet those standards because they don't have them anymore.
And I guess the enforcement arm, so the way we enforce the codes right now, if somebody's doing work without a permit, it takes us to see it, or somebody to call that in, or you do things through the building permit application process. So it's not going to change your permit application, other than zoning's going to have to take a look at to make sure if you're in one of these districts that it meets the standards. So no special enforcement is going to be required from this, over and above what we do now.
Could you just tell how these can be established again?
Well, it can be established, again, there's three ways of getting a zoning code adopted on a parcel. It can be initiated by the property owners in that area, can be initiated by staff, or it can be initiated by, what am I missing, David? Staff or council. Council could initiate something like that. It's done. It's infrequent for the council to initiate a zone change for an area, but staff has done it. When I hate to bring this up, but when we did, so why do you bring it up? But when we did the whole Near East plan, that was a staff. It was a staff initiated thing. It wasn't initiated from the neighborhood. Initially, we got some pretty good support in the neighborhood. That changed, but that was staff initiated. We have other things that are initiated by the property owner. So there are various avenues of initiating these. It's not with the overlay code. If this code gets adopted, it just doesn't apply to one area. It takes some other event to get that onto a neighborhood.
Right, and I think a lot of that is going to be neighborhood promotion from staff standpoint. As we go to these neighborhood associations describing what's going on, Landmarks Commission does it already with their historic districts. Now, it's different than a traditional neighborhood, but that education element is there to the owners.
Every question you out, David? You got anything else? Okay, all right. Well, I mean, this is like as I said before to Berkman or Anson, this is the ordinance that we'd like to bring forward. I think we've got some opportunity to do a little bit of fine tuning here, but this is what I'd like to get moving early next year for adoption. So I think we can still make a couple changes to it, but I know it doesn't meet everybody's needs. I mean, it doesn't go to a lot of preservationists. This does not go far enough. But to some of on the other side, we're going too far. So we're trying to, as we move forward with this, we're trying to come up with a product or with a code right away that can get general support within this community. So with that, I thank you. I appreciate the time.
Good job. Where the process is going from here.
Where the process is going from. The process from here is we're hoping to be able to bring this ordinance out. Hopefully we can get it before Planning Commission and Council, either late January or early February at some point. We're going to figure out how we can get some open houses on this potentially, but that's how we're going to do it. And we'll advertise and market it through our website and through the various means that we have. So we're hoping. We want to get going with this ordinance because we know we've sat on this for a while. It's taken us a while to bring this to where we are right now, and now we want to take advantage and get it out and get it reviewed. So thank you all. Thank you very much. Have a great night. Thank you, Nick, for coming up from Illinois.